What is up, everybody? Happy Saturday morning. That means another edition of the College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. The usual crew back with you this morning. Justin Van Zuiden, that's me, STL Cardinals 84. John Laub alongside. I know TJ filled in for me last week, so appreciate him doing the old double duty with producing and co-hosting. Youth sports finally coming to an end for me. Happy to maybe have a couple Saturdays where I don't have to run around like a crazy person trying to get my kids everywhere. So I should be around, I believe, for the rest of the college football Saturdays. And we're kind of in the basically the middle part, the heat of conference season. So we do have some exciting matchups likely coming our way here over the next month. And, I wasn't around last week, but lots of exciting football games on last week's slate, especially the night games at Oregon, Ohio State, and LSU Ole Miss. Those games did not disappoint last week, John. It was a really good week for college football.
Oh, it was pretty amazing, and I just made one mistake. I actually went out to dinner with my wife, and a player that I put in my night lineup, he got me the 0, so I was a little upset. But, life happens, right? You gotta do what you have to do. But I did got home by about 10 o'clock, enjoyed the late-night games. And we've had a good couple days of football. Last night, if people didn't watch that Oklahoma State BYU game, was it 31-30 or 35-33, something like that? And BYU won on the last second, 19-second touchdown. So we got off to a good, and we have a great slate, Justin. There's some really interesting games today on the main slate on DraftKings.
Yeah, I was a little tilted. So I bet Oklahoma State plus the 9.5 points last night. Ooh. That was my pick on scores and odds. That was a winner. But I also bet some on the Oklahoma State money line at like plus 260. And so that when Oklahoma State scored with like a minute 5 to go, I think it was, to take the lead. And then BYU had like fourth down and they were already down to like 35, 40 seconds to go. And then they go down in like 3 plays and score a touchdown. So I was we still ended up ahead. They covered the spread, but was a little unnerved at that finish there. But was a nice, finally, and of course it happens when they're not on the main slate, but finally a nice game for Ollie Gordon.
I was thinking we waited all year since week 1, right? And then he had a great game when obviously, some people played him in that slate, but yeah, wasn't the main slate.
Yeah, 3 total touchdowns for Gordon last night, and 38-35 the final score. Credible fourth quarter there, back and forth. So hopefully we get some of that action today. John mentioned some pretty good games. Not the top 10 type of showdowns that we saw last week, but Miami does play Louisville at noon. That should be a good game as far, particularly a good fantasy game. Alabama-Tennessee is probably the headline game today. That's a 3:30 kickoff. To Alabama and Tennessee both have 1 loss. So kind of like that Ole Miss LSU game last week, kind of feels like a game where you got to win to maybe stay in that playoff hunt for now. They're both 5-1, and they're both ranked in the top 11 right now. Michigan and Illinois play later this afternoon as well. That's our other matchup this afternoon of 2 top 25 teams, and then Georgia and Texas, the headliner tonight. So maybe I'm selling a little bit short. Pretty good games compared to what we would normally see, but maybe not quite the caliber of last week. But it should still be a fun fantasy slate, so let's go ahead and start digging in. Was trying to look through injury news. There's really not a whole lot, which is kind of surprising for this time of year. Haynes King is the big one. He is confirmed out, though, so we don't have to wait on that. He will not play for Georgia Tech. They've got a tough matchup today against Notre Dame anyhow. Monangai for Rutgers listed as questionable. That just came out this morning. So I did have some interest in him. That's one to kind of monitor. That game is, that's a noon kick. So maybe we'll get confirmation of that before kickoff. But otherwise, not a whole lot of situations to keep an eye on today. Is there anything that you find impactful that we need to watch out for?
Well, I do think Clemson always has some nice options on offense, right? That offense is clicking, and Bryant Wesco is not playing today against Virginia. So I think that's interesting because it could open up opportunity and targets for other receivers on the slate. So, and I don't think the Wisconsin Northwestern isn't on, but Will Pauling is out if you are playing season long, or maybe he's on a different slate on a different site or something. But he's out, and we've been playing him often because he was low salary. I haven't been producing necessarily, but I've had my shares of Will Pauling of Wisconsin.
Yeah, he's had some good games and some underwhelming games for sure. It seems like it's been all or nothing. If you're playing on an all-day slate or something, or FanDuel has a bunch of slates. Sometimes they throw some of those games on there. Just to make sure. Or John mentioned, if you happen to be in some season-long leagues, make sure you don't have Will Pauling in your lineups today. All right, let's start with some quarterback talk today. And this slate is almost the opposite of last week, in that last week we had a ton of the dual threat quarterbacks. And it's not that we don't have any of them today, but the quarterbacks that we have at the top of the pricing scale today, a lot of them are primarily throwers. You've got Shedeur Sanders is at 9,300 on DraftKings today. Cam Ward is all the way up at 10.8K. These guys are namely going to get their production through the air. It's not like they're these dual threat guys that are going to get 100 yards on the ground. Milroe obviously is a guy who can run it if you go down a little farther, Riley Leonard. So I'm not saying it's everybody, but it's just not the dual threat guys at the top that maybe that's what we're only considering. We've got some throwers in there today. So how are you handling some of these top options at QB?
So putting together lineups today, I did notice in general it's a little tricky to get those two quarterbacks over 10K, right? Ward and Milroe. You can definitely do it, but it does hurt your ability to spend up at the running back position, which I tend to like on this slate. So I do like to dip down a little bit. And because Milroe, yes, he has the rushing upside, but Tennessee's been pretty good. And Alabama's on the road here, right, Justin? So I feel like there's some risk. Now, I do love him in GPP, but in cash games, I don't have any Milroe or Ward just because it's harder to put in. And I love Cade Klubnik, Shedeur Sanders, and Riley Leonard. I think those three quarterbacks, I think you almost have to have one of those three in your lineups. Like I said, I put three together every week. I got at least one in every lineup, because I think the ceiling is pretty high for those players. Maybe not as high if Cam Ward throws his 5 or 6 touchdowns, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen today. That's an interesting argument. I love Klubnik. He's probably my favorite play in the high range today.
It's pretty remarkable when you look at, if we go back to the first week of the season, everyone was ready to call Dabo Swinney, Clemson, and the frauds, and they don't use the transfer portal. And look at this offense. They only scored 3 points against Georgia. And really that whole next week after that first game of the year, Clemson was like the laughing stock of college football. And since then, they've scored 66, 59, 40, 29, and 49. And the 29 was against Florida State. And while Florida State is horrible, their defense is at least still okay. It's been the offense. So, I am not going to add this up on the calculator, but rough math from the accountant here, they're scoring mid 40 points per game in their last 5 games. So safe to say that maybe the world overreacted a little bit to that first game for Clemson. Klubnik, and they've had a lot of blowouts too. So, in competitive games, the numbers could be even higher, but Klubnik has 4 rushing touchdowns. He threw for 309 and 3 touchdowns last week. He's got a 4 touchdown game, a 5 touchdown game through the air. Yeah, he's been good. So, he's certainly an option that, many people might say, whoa, 9,600, but he's proven that he's worth it. So I like those guys at the top today. I also like Sanders. And part of my approach today with some of these quarterbacks that maybe get more of their production through the air is to maybe pair them with 2 pass catchers. I normally don't do that, but if one of these throw heavy quarterbacks is going to be the guy you need today, maybe there's 2 pass catchers that can support a GPP winning lineup. I wouldn't do that in cash games, but so Sanders is certainly a guy in that realm. He's expensive and Hunter's expensive, so you're going to need to get some value around them. But I'll have Sanders in some GPP lineups today. Don't mind the Leonard call. Again, dual threat guy. I think Notre Dame's going to control that game with Haynes King not playing. I like Leonard as well. And then as we go down the list a little bit more, I think a guy that is at least somewhat interesting. Nobody's going to play him today, but Curtis Rourke is a MAC transfer, and it's pretty interesting to see what Indiana has been able to do offensively with a MAC transfer quarterback with plenty of experience. They've got Elijah Surratt that's come in as basically their number 1 wide receiver, and Indiana's been a top 20 team. So I don't mind Curtis Rourke in the mid-range today. He's not going to be super popular, but I think he's a play you can look to in GPPs as well. So as we start to go down the quarterback scale, who else are you looking at today?
Well, Justin, let me just say we have projected right now less than 5% for Curtis Rourke. We actually have him at like less than 2. I couldn't agree with you more. I've been writing about Curtis Rourke now for about the last 3 weeks. That Indiana offense is top 5 in the nation. They're putting up crazy amount of points. I know you might look at the matchup, right? And people might say, well, Nebraska, but they're home. And you mentioned Elijah Surratt. We'll talk about him later. But I think Curtis Rourke is a very sneaky, like you can put him with the GPP with one of the players we mentioned above. And if you get the right combo, I like Rourke a lot, my friend. So I think he's crazy value that is being overlooked here. And then the one player that I do like, if you want to go for low with some rushing upside, I like Sawyer Robertson of Baylor. Now, check the weather a little bit. It looks like wind and maybe a little damp, but Sawyer Robinson against Texas Tech, he's at 6,800. And we were talking about the lack of dual threat ability at the top, but Robertson does give you some production with his legs. He has scored 2 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 games. He's got over 130 yards rushing with a high of 82 against Colorado. And he's decent at throwing the football. So I like Sawyer Robinson. If you want to kind of pivot, that Texas Tech Baylor game we haven't really talked about, but that's an interesting game also, especially for GPP.
Yeah, I think that's a game that, we could certainly see some offense from if the weather cooperates, obviously.
Yeah.
Seems like a little damp, maybe a little breezy, but it's the time of year where that's going to happen in some of these games. We still got a 55-point total in that game, so pretty healthy number. I don't mind either of the quarterbacks in that game, and like you mentioned, Robertson brings you a little bit of dual threat ability, and you don't need a ton at 6,800.
Yes,
to pay off that salary. I'd rather play him than Peyton Thorne, who's getting pretty similar in terms of projection. And Fafita for Arizona, I think, is viable as well. Another cheap guy that's probably going to get a healthy dose of ownership today with them facing Colorado.
He's been my hardest decision maker today because I know there's a lot of people who like Fafita, and I really liked him over the summer. I thought he was going to have a pretty nice year. But, man, I started to look deeper at his stats. And if you look at him, I mean, here's some of the game logs. And, hey, he could break out of it. I'm not saying he can't. And Colorado will probably force the tempo, right? Put points on the board. But here, 13, 15, 10, 8. Now, he opened up with 35, but that was that monster game where you remember when T-Mac went off for 4 touchdowns early.
That's what's going to happen today. We're banking on McMillan to get him there.
There you go. It's all up to McMillan. So Fafita's fascinating. I know everyone loves him. I don't think I would play him in GPP. I do like him in cash games. But, I mean, maybe you want – what's our ownership projection? I forgot. Sometimes
it's high. I mean, it's 20s.
There you go. So I don't think I'd play him in GPP. And I do like T-Mac. That's not the point. But I do think – how about Miller Moss? People are writing about him. This is an interesting spot about Maryland. I do find him fascinating. His ownership might be a little high for me in GPP at 19%. But I think in cash game, he's an interesting player. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, so I've been playing Miller Moss like every week. I don't know. I have a soft spot, I guess, for USC. I just think that I expected the receivers to maybe bust out a little bit more than they have. I watched that first game of the year against LSU where he threw for like almost 400 yards.
Yeah.
Had a really good game against Wisconsin as well. Threw for 3 touchdowns against Michigan. So the turnovers have been an issue maybe the last few weeks. But again, I've always got a soft spot for him and I like playing him in GPPs. The trouble that I have is, these days, who do I trust pairing him with? Like Lane has not been good the last couple weeks. Branch has game-breaking speed, but it's not like he's going to catch 10 passes. So that's where I have a little bit of nervousness today is in GPP. If I want to play Miller Moss, I don't really know who to pair him with, and the ownership's going to be high enough today where I think today is maybe one of the first weeks that I don't feel great about it.
Yeah, I got him in one of my 3 lineups. I do think there's potential there. But I agree, I don't feel great about it either. I want him to be better in the Lincoln Riley offense, right? And I watch, and you're just like, he's missing people. He's been okay. He's just okay for an for a USC offense with Lincoln Riley calling the plays.
Anything else at quarterback that we haven't addressed?
We mentioned the USC game. How about Billy Edwards? There is risk there, but Billy Edwards is home. And if you look at his ceiling, let me find him here for a second. There is an enticing ceiling here. He had 27 points, 25, then 23, 23. He had a bad game against Northwestern, and I watched that one. I think that was on a Friday night, right? Last Friday night or something against Northwestern. Kind of became a slog game. I tend to think this game will be a little faster paced against USC at home. So I do think Billy Edwards is interesting. Not in love with him, but I do think he's someone worth thinking about.
Yeah, and they are not shy about chucking the ball when they have to. It's kind of the same situation as with McMillan, right? Can Felton get him there? Yeah. Look, more people are going to play McMillan today. So if you want to go away from the Arizona guys and go with Edwards and Felton, I think that's a fantastic way to potentially approach a GPP lineup today. So don't mind that call.
I do like the Felton as a pivot off of McMillan. I think that's very interesting, Justin. I like that a lot.
All right, let's go ahead and shift our attention to the running back position here, where we've got a couple guys at the top that haven't been on a ton of main slates this year. Tennessee and Texas Tech, for whatever reason, they've played a lot of off-time games, or they just didn't happen to wind up on main slates, a lot of night slates. So we've got maybe some guys that aren't the most household DFS names if you're just kind of casually playing. In Dylan Sampson and Taj Brooks, but both have been very good. And then maybe the more household names in Phil Maffa and Woody Marks, as both of those teams have been on the main slate quite a bit. All 4 guys have had their moments this year. So if we go, maybe that, I think to me, that's kind of a top tier today. And Monangai, if he plays, keeping an eye on that situation. But of Sampson, Brooks, Maffa, and Marks, you got a preferred one or two out of that top group?
My favorite one is Taj Brooks. I really do like this Texas Tech offense. They're at home against Baylor. And the reason I like them, the better way to attack Baylor, I believe, is on the ground. And Taj Brooks has been incredible in his starts against Baylor during his career. He's averaging 26 fantasy points a game. I think you're a lock for 20 to 25 touches. He might even have more. I think he's been fantastic this year. I really like him in this game. I have Brooks in 2 of my 3 lineups, but I'll tell you what I did building my cash game. I try to get 2 of these 4 into my cash game lineups. Now, you might have to make sacrifices at other positions and find value, but I do like having two of these four. I like Woody Marks second. Is it Woody? Why do I get his first name?
Yeah, it is.
Woody. He did change his name. I like Marks. If you don't go with Moss at USC in cash games, I like Marks and Brooks are kind of like my preferred two, but I do like Sampson and Moffa that I have each of them in one lineup.
Yeah, I've got the most exposure to Marks and then Brooks second. So I like both of those guys. And it's not that I like Marks more than Brooks. I have them fairly similar. I've just found that I need that $1,000 savings.
It is a big savings, right?
Yeah, you can do a little bit more with it. So that's the main reason why I've got a little bit more Marks. Again, Monangai I like. You can see I've got Monangai tagged in Lineup HQ. If you're following along or if you're a premium subscriber, I am the green dots. I'm probably going to remove that dot when we get off the air and have that extra 30 minutes before lock. If we don't have confirmation that he's playing, just don't want anybody playing somebody that's injured. So, but if he's a full go and certainly going to be at lower ownership now because of the news that came out just a little bit ago, I think he'd be interesting for GPPs. But if we go down the board a little bit more, you've got Conley for Arizona. That's kind of in that same price range. That's going to get some ownership today. Nate Noel for Missouri. He might be an interesting pivot. He was on the injury report earlier this week, but got upgraded to probable. So seems like he's okay to play today. Isaac Brown for Louisville is probably the other guy in this middle range that people are interested in. But you've got Jamal Haynes, you've got Jeremiah Love, you've got Damian Martinez in this mix as well, kind of right around that 6K price point. Who do you like in here?
My preferred guy is definitely Isaac Brown. He's just been so good, and he's been such a value. On the last 2 weeks, I've talked about him on our show here, and I know he's gone up a little bit in price, but I'm still interested at 5.6. I mean, basically the last 2 weeks, he's been the best value, in my opinion, at running back, and he's helped me cash in my cash game lineups. A player that I've not been on him, and I know the matchup isn't great, but Donovan Edwards, I'm intrigued by him this week because he was right? He actually showed me something last week against Washington. He had 19.8, which I believe that was his highest output of the year. Now, part of his Khalil Mullins never got on track against the Huskies, but they finally used Edwards in the receiving game. I mean, I don't understand, Justin. This I can't figure out. Donovan Edwards is a good receiver if you've watched him, right? And when you look at the numbers this year, I'm like, I know they stink at passing, but can't you throw a couple dump offs to an explosive playmaker? Like, I don't understand. He's only got 9 receptions in 6 games, but last week he had 2 receptions. I'd like to see that more. So if you're looking for a differentiating player, I like Michigan against Illinois, and Edwards had 95 yards rushing last week. And I'm not a big Edwards guy, but he did show me something.
And that Illinois rush defense has looked significantly worse in recent weeks. I mean, Purdue ran the ball all over them last week, and then we saw Purdue, not even score last night.
They were bad last night. Sorry, I shouldn't say that.
They were bad last night. So maybe not holding it against them, playing Oregon, but still. After you finally looked like maybe you made a switch at quarterback and we're going to have at least something offensively to not score at all was a little bit disappointing. So I don't mind either guy in that Michigan backfield today. I think they are certainly going to, run the football 50 times if they can against that defense. So certainly plays that you can consider in your GPP builds today. Again, I'm trying to save some salary in certain spots. So Brown at 5,600 on Louisville, I think is in play, especially if, that game against Miami is competitive. They'll try to hang on to the ball and keep it out of that offense's hands. There's not a ton in terms of punts that I like at running back today. Our highest projected own guy is Josh McCray for Illinois at 3.8K against Michigan. I don't love going super cheap at running back. I'd rather do it at wide receiver today where we do have some value, but is there anybody you like if we're trying to find super cheap plays?
It's interesting because I think you and I do similar. We think similarly when we're building lineups. I tried to get McCray into a lineup at 3,800, but I think there's too much risk. Now, if you do want to punt, I do have him in one of my 3 lineups, but I don't feel great about it. But, he's the lead back. Caden Fagan is out. I think the injury might be serious. There's some rumors, how long's Fagan going to be out. So you do have McCray should be in line for the majority of touches. It's not as bad of a matchup as people think, right? This isn't the Michigan of the last 3 seasons. So I do think Illinois will be able to move the ball, but I don't like punting because I don't know if he gets 20 to 25 touches, right, Justin? Like, that's what we're looking for. I'm not sure if he's there. And the guy I did like, but now that Noel is playing, I did like Marcus Carroll at Mizzou, but it looks like Noel's playing, so I got off of Marcus Carroll, took him out of all my lineups.
Yeah, and he was a guy that, and I forget where did Carroll play? I knew it was some small school where he put up big numbers, and hasn't really gotten the chance to do that. I mean, we've seen some of these guys, transfer and put up big numbers, but he's kind of stuck in the depth chart there at Missouri. But the name, I remembered him from some of the random slates putting up big numbers last year. So, all right. That's enough talk about running backs. It's pretty ugly there at the bottom today. We'll get to some value guys at wide receiver for sure that you can punt with in your lineups. All right, let's move to wide receiver. Hefty price tag, $10K on Travis Hunter. That's a big one. I'm putting him in some GPP lineups with Sanders, but $10K solo for Travis Hunter is really tough to fit. Especially when Felton and McMillan right now, we have them projecting for more fantasy points and they're significantly cheaper. So I know you mentioned earlier that you like Felton as the pivot in GPPs. I kind of like that thought process, particularly if you're playing some Edwards at quarterback. But I mean, among the 3, right, it's just given the pricing difference, it's tough to ignore McMillan, and he feels like he has to be the kind of lock cash game play for sure.
I couldn't agree with you more for cash game. I mean, it is such a significant salary savings. You were just talking about $1,000 before. When you're looking at wide receiver, McMillan could easily outscore Hunter on this slate, but you're saving 1.7. And, this Hunter, do we really know how much he's going to play? Is he going to be on the defensive side? Are they going to, like the injury? It's clearly an injury, but he seems to have he'd escaped the worst case scenario and he should be able to suit up. But Justin, what if he only plays half the snaps that he usually does, right? And there's a chance here Colorado could blow out Arizona. So I don't have Hunter in any of my cash game lineups. I don't have him in my GPP either. I just think it's too much. I do like Felton and McMillan both.
All right, yeah, McMillan's certainly the top point per dollar projected play there for sure. And then, the next range is largely going to get ignored because of that, like Restrepo, Burden, Ryan Williams. We've seen these guys have slate-breaking games, but maybe not quite the consistency. And then, we've got kind of a group of guys in the 6Ks. Williams for Clemson has kind of emerged. John talked about their depth issues there. So Williams could be looking at a lot of targets today. Anybody in this middle tier, Josh Kelly's another one that's got some buzz today. So who do you like the most in this 6-7K range?
So I don't really love anyone. I think they're interesting, but I'm Malachi Fields, but I think he's a GPP only. However, if I don't want Taj Brooks and I want to pivot, Josh Kelly. If you're going to do a GPP, I think Josh Kelly could be a very nice pivot if you're willing to get off of Taj Brooks here. Because if you look, 34 opening week, but he's got games with 25 and 21 DraftKings points. He's averaging 19.6. I do like the game script environment for Texas Tech at home against Baylor. And I think our ownership, I don't think he's very high, is he? What do we
About
got, Josh?
mid-teens, I think.
19% higher. Yeah, higher than I thought. But I do like Josh Kelly if you want to get in the game and you don't want to go Josh and don't go Taj Brooks.
Yeah, I think Kelly's certainly fine. And again, we talked about that. If you're going to maybe stack up a game, assuming that the wind isn't too bad there, you can roll some Baylor exposure and then run that back and hope that we get something of a shootout in that game. So, and that range, that pricing range, I don't love anybody in here. So getting a little bit of savings from those higher options, I think is certainly fine. Williams, I don't mind, particularly in some stacks with Klubnik. And I talked about the potential for using Shedeur Sanders with a couple of pass catchers, or if you're not convinced that Hunter has a full role, then just play Wester at 5,600 and hope that he's kind of the guy that gets most of the targets today. And then, the guy that we've kind of highlighted a couple times just in passing earlier in the show is Elijah Surratt at 5.2K, just like a few of the guys in this 5K range here.
Yeah, I love Surratt. I'll talk about him a little bit more later. Caden Prather, we have him at a pretty high ownership. So there must be people who are kind of astute to this. I do like this, possibility of Maryland at USC being a little higher scoring than we think. We have him at 20% ownership basically, but he's only 5K. Prather is not as good as Taj Felton, but they pretty much have a funnel of the two pass catchers. Those are going to be the two guys in the Maryland passing game. So I do think Prather is an interesting receiver at a lower salary, I should say.
Yeah, and so mention that this is the spot where you can get some value and you can start to mix and match guys here. Mentioned Prather at 5K. Loveland for Michigan is getting some buzz at 4,600. We've got him projected at 14 fantasy points. And then if you're going bottom of the barrel today, there's a couple options. And you mentioned it, Clemson, where's the ball going to go for them today? Do you want to target one of the punts for Clemson or Hal Presley for Baylor is the guy that we have projected for pretty high ownership. That's basically min salary. He's $100 above the floor on DraftKings. So you like going for Presley? You want to take a shot at the wheel of Clemson here? Where are you looking for cheap value?
So Presley is 3,100. I'm not in love with him, but I do like him. He helps you build the lineups with those nice stud running backs. He's the wide receiver at Baylor. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he's a GPP play. Let's leave. I can't put him in GPP because I don't think his ceiling is there, right? If you look at the game log here, 11, 16, 12, and I don't think he can get you that 20, 25 point, right? If you really want to get the GPP, you need to have that upside. But Hal Presley for cash, I love. And you know what? I do love Jake Bringenstool, the tight end. Now, remember, DraftKings tight ends count at wide receiver. But with Wesco out last week, Bringenstool had 7 receptions for 104 yards and a touchdown. I have him in 2 of my 3 cash game lineups right now. And in one lineup, I paired him with Klubnik. I do like him here. I think he's 4,000. That's not bare minimum, but it's pretty close. And the other wide receiver I do like, we haven't mentioned him yet, but he's the wide receiver at Colorado. If you're willing to go near the bottom, Will Shepherd, 3,900. Last 2 games, my friend, he scored 19 and 19.9 DraftKings points. He's on the field a ton. If you look at the snaps, it's like Will Shepherd's always on the field. In the beginning of the year, he wasn't getting a lot of targets, but now we have some injuries and a concern about Hunter's health. So I do like Shepherd 3,900.
Yeah. So again, these are, that's maybe 5 or 6 names there with Presley, with the Clemson guys, Loveland. If you want to go there with Colorado, I mean, there's certainly options you can look to down here. Even there's some other guys that even we didn't mention that we've got projected for around double-digit fantasy points. So this is where you should go hunting. Brazell for Tennessee. Like if you want to take a shot I think I'm off the Tennessee wide receivers until
Me too. I'm done.
Squirrel White. You look again, options here, and I'd rather go into the 3Ks with wide receiver roulette as opposed to running back roulette. Spend your money where the guaranteed points are at quarterback and running back, and then if you hit with your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 plays today, especially in GPPs, I think that's going to be the key. So, I think that takes us through the DraftKings slate today, and then we'll touch on FanDuel a little bit here, and we'll get to some questions before we get out of here. But before we get to questions and to FanDuel, we usually like to do a little recap of the DraftKings discussion with John's fantastic 4 plays. So, John, what do you got today?
All right, everyone, you can go to our website and use our optimizer. You can optimize up to 20 lineups. You can do cash games, GPP, and my fantastic 4 today at quarterback. We mentioned it. I like Riley Leonard a ton. I have him in 2 of my 3 cash game lineups. It is the rushing upside. And when I was looking at him, I do believe he's been a little skimpy on the rushing touchdowns, which we know they are fickle. He has only scored 1 in each of the last 2 games. In the 2 prior to that, he had scored 5 rushing touchdowns. He's actually also been a little better throwing the football, my friend. If people haven't been watching, he's thrown 5 touchdowns in the year the last 2 weeks. So I like Lincoln Riley a lot this week. So he's my fantastic 4 quarterback. I have a running back. I like Quayle Conley. I didn't speak about him much before, but if you want to get off of T-Mac and maybe you want to go that Colorado passing game, I do believe that Arizona is going to be able to run the football a little bit, but why I like Conley also, he's got 22 receptions on the season for 151 yards. He's their goal line back and he's their pass catcher, so I love Conley in this game. So I like him as my fantastic 4 running back. You mentioned it. I'm all in on this until Indiana shows me they don't put up 35 points or more. I love Elijah Surratt at wide receiver 5,200. And one player we did not talk about, how about Jeremy Bernard, the wide receiver at Alabama? If you've been watching Alabama and you've been looking at this offense a little bit, I do think opponents have finally caught on that Ryan Williams is a superstar and they should probably put a safety over it.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? That Bernard is getting a little bit more advantageous matchups, and Bernard has been better over the last couple games. I thought he started slow in the year. I'm just trying to find him now on my list here. He started slower in the season, and now all of a sudden he's got an uptick in production, 18, 10, and 17 DraftKings points the last 3 weeks. I like Bernard in this game. So my fantastic 4 this week in our optimizer, Riley Leonard, Quayle Conley, Elijah Surratt, and Jeremy Bernard, and then see what you get around them, everyone.
Awesome. Like those calls today. Again, plug those in. Check us out. And again, if you're interested in unlocking some more of the tools that we've got at RotoGrinders, don't forget you can get a month of combo premium for $120. That includes NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, and college football. And of course, with this time of year, there's all these sports going on. Better bang for your buck now than you'll find throughout most of the year. So $120 for a month. If you want a test run before you buy, you can dip your toes in the water with a 3-day pass for $19.99. Check the links in the description for more info on that. So, all right, we'll pivot over. We'll talk some FanDuel here this morning before we get out of here. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the RotoGrinders Discord. You do not have to be a premium subscriber, just a RotoGrinders member. RotoGrinders.com/Discord. I'm going to hop in right now to the live stream chat. That's a dedicated channel we have for our live streams here. That you can answer or you can get your questions answered live. If you drop them in the YouTube chat, if I catch them, I might run across a couple of them and throw them out there, but prefer if you drop them in the Discord, and it's easier for me to track them while hosting when they're in kind of one spot. So rotogrinders.com/Discord live stream chat channel. And we'll get your questions answered. I'm going to hop in there and grab, if any of you have posted throughout the show, I'll get in there and grab those. And we'll pivot over and talk some FanDuel here as well before we get out of here. So I'm going to do that right now and load up the FanDuel main slate. Again, if you're not familiar, FanDuel adds the later night games, the good ones, onto their main slate. So the games that we have added on FanDuel, LSU, Arkansas has been added. Georgia, Texas has been added. Kansas State, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Florida. 4 of the night games added on FanDuel to their main slate today, which gives us some options. At quarterback, it adds guys like Nussmeier, Taylon Green, Avery Johnson, good dual threat guy. You got Garrett Green on that slate as well. So in addition to a lot of the good quarterbacks that we've already discussed today, anything different that you want to mention with FanDuel quarterback today?
Well, you did mention Nussmeier, and I think he's very interesting on this slate. I think Nussmeier's been playing some really good football. I don't know if everyone's watching LSU as much as I do, but they've been on a lot of television. And I think Nussmeier here, we have him at a small percentage right now at under 5%. LSU can go off. I know it's not a great matchup on the road against Arkansas, but all of a sudden, LSU, that SEC has changed a little bit, right? We do like Texas. Obviously, they're the top dog. But who knows? If Texas beats Georgia, doesn't everything change? What if Alabama loses, right? All of a sudden, you got a sneaky LSU team here with only 1 loss. I love Nussmeier. I think he's being overlooked. Now, granted, he doesn't have the rushing upside, right? But, man, he can throw 5 touchdowns at any time. I think this is a sneaky start, and people seem to be not interested in him.
Yeah, I like him. I think he'll end up checking in slightly higher ownership than that, but there's enough options. I mean, enough good quarterbacks on this FanDuel slate that everybody's going to be spread out a little bit. We actually don't have anybody above 20% ownership on FanDuel. Green, we actually have as the highest on the other side of that game. I think we could see a sneaky shootout there. You kind of mentioned the SEC is a little bit different. The offenses have gotten pretty good, with the exception of Oklahoma. That's a little harsh, but they can't figure out quarterback, and all of their receivers are hurt. So it's been a tough year for the Sooners. But I like Nussmeier. I like that game in general. I think those are the 2 options, maybe additionally on FanDuel that we can look at. All right, we'll get to running back and receiver here on FanDuel as well, but a couple of the questions that were dropped in the Discord by Golf Nut. Do we like Conley? So you touched on that actually right after he dropped that question. So that one's covered. He's a fine play today. How about a lineup with Fafita and McMillan, with Robertson and Presley as well? So 2 quarterback receiver combos, very affordable. And there's also plenty on the board to help fill out that lineup. So, I like using that Baylor combination and Arizona combination today. I know maybe you're not quite as high on Fafita as a lot of people are, but still like the way that lineup kind of comes together.
Oh, I like that build because you should be able to pay up at the running back position.
Right.
So in that scenario, I'm not against it. Yes, I like it a lot because it does give you nice options at running back.
And then as an aside, he also, Golf Nut also asked, any interest in betting the Tennessee money line today? I've been a little underwhelmed with that passing game lately. And even though they're at home, it's still Alabama. I think I'm not betting that game personally. I don't have a take on Tennessee versus Alabama today as far as how the game plays out. I think it'll be a good game, but I don't think I trust Tennessee enough.
I couldn't agree with you more. The one thing, I don't bet on games that the numbers don't tell me to bet, or I don't have a decent feeling, and I don't feel good about Alabama or Tennessee. Like, I don't know which one. I think it's a toss-up, so I'm not betting it. I'm not taking it either.
All right, let's move over to running back on FanDuel today. And again, a lot of the same options here, and there's really not a ton of great running backs in the night games that have been added. I like kind of the same options as I do on DraftKings on FanDuel today, maybe with the exception of DJ Giddens. or a Trevor Etienne, but I don't love that matchup for him tonight. So Giddens is probably the one guy I would add into the mix, but otherwise my running back pool is pretty much the same guys that we talked about on DraftKings.
I agree with you, and I do like to play the DraftKings night slate, and I did put DJ Giddens in my DraftKings night slate. Now it's also PPR, so that helps his value a little bit more. But I do, and look at the difference in Isaac Brown on FanDuel. I guess I'm going off on a tangent, but look at Brown on FanDuel compared to what he's on DraftKings. I love looking at the different pricing sometimes, like how high guys are up on different sites. So I don't like Brown as much on FanDuel.
The price tag on FanDuel is appropriate, right? It's DraftKings has not raised him up as much as they should have. So it's definitely an interesting. It's more of a conversation about whether or not to play him on FanDuel, whereas on DraftKings, he's probably going to be a cash game lock for a lot of people tonight. All right, let's look at wide receivers here on FanDuel, and then I'll check for any last question. So Brian had asked, any interest in Brown and DK GPP? Sure. Any interest in Hunter for, I believe, the running back for Auburn in DK today as well?
Oh, that's one. I just noticed him on the FanDuel, and I do think he's interesting. He's been better than I thought, and I was looking at some numbers. I do think he's kind of like an interest in GPP. I don't think I'd play Hunter in cash games because there's so much. I like the other guys much better, but I think Hunter's a very nice pivot in GPP.
Yeah, Brown is certainly the cash game play on DraftKings today. And Hunter, I don't mind in GPPs. For what it's worth, I did bet Missouri today, but that's my favorite bet today if you want a sneak peek on scores and odds, which right now, I don't toot my own horn too much. I try not to, but I'm 7-0, my last 7 college football picks. So I guess if you play the numbers game, I'm due for some L's today, but it's been a nice run for the last 8 days or so, and I am on Missouri today against Auburn minus 4 points. So that is my favorite pick of the day. All right, wide receivers on FanDuel. This is where we do have some options in those later games. We talked about Garrett Nussmeier, so you've got Kyron Lacey. You've got Armstrong for Arkansas. Dane Key continues to pop as a value both on the DraftKings night slate and on the FanDuel slate. So do like some of these receiver options in the later games.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting. You can do back-to-back stacks on FanDuel in this the Arkansas LSU, because you can go Lacey and Nussmeier. You can go Armstrong and Tylen Green, or you can go like Aaron Anderson. If you don't want to pay up for Lacey for LSU, you can go Aaron Anderson. So I do kind of like this as a sneaky kind of, but you can do both sides of the stack on that LSU Arkansas game. And the one player I don't think we mentioned him on the DraftKings. Dane Key, the wide receiver at Kentucky. If you haven't been watching Dane Key, he's been really good. He scored over 20 fantasy points in 3 straight games.
That's a night game. That's why he didn't come up on DraftKings.
Oh, that's why. Okay. And yes, I do like Dane Key. He's pretty cheap at 6.3 here on the FanDuel. I think he's almost a cash lock to me for Dane Key.
Somebody in the YouTube chat did ask any interest in Keyshawn Williams, who would be the Indiana kind of number 2 receiver as a pivot away from Surratt. I'm playing Surratt today, but I mean, that's certainly a fine argument to make.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that there's enough volume in that offense so far this season that you can pivot to Keyshawn Williams. I'm not doing it either, but you can make a good argument and a good pivot.
Steve Oj in the Discord chat has asked, better option in a DraftKings single entry GPP as a cheap wide receiver, Sturdivant or Presley?
Oh my God. I would have to go Presley. No, in GPP, go Sturdivant, because he's going to have, right? People are going to play Presley. I think I'm going to go Sturdivant, but I'm not a big Sturdivant guy. I'm worried about UCLA might be one of the worst teams in the Power Four, right?
Yeah, they're pretty bad. They're pretty bad. Let me put it this way, right? And then this is no offense to Rutgers, but a noon kickoff between UCLA and Rutgers is probably last on the viewing totem pole today. I will not watch that game. I assure you I will check the box score, but UCLA and Rutgers will not be the game I'm turning on the TV here. So apologies to Big Ten Network or whatever. And that's got to be a rough trip for UCLA too. I mean,
oh my God,
this is a tangent, but how goofy is that? I mean, you got a conference game that you probably couldn't find much longer of a flight than UCLA to Rutgers, but here we are, and it's a noon kick for UCLA all the way across the country, and they're already really bad. Like, I should probably bet Rutgers too, but I won't. I'm not going to do it.
And you know what? I live in the Northeast. I don't know if you've been out here, but man, they got to fly into New York or into Brunswick or whatever in New Jersey. Like, it's just that's a very hard thing for UCLA. The traffic and the time change. Oh, not easy at all.
Yeah, Fluff has also asked about a few options. So we just talked about Giddens. I like him, and he says also in our projections, and I did kind of notice that. Thorne is kind of popping as a decent option. He also asked about Hawkins. I'm not going with either of those guys today. Like, look, Oklahoma's offense has just been brutal. Hawkins does give you, I guess, some dual threat ability, but any interest in Thorne or Hawkins for you?
I mean, GPP, yes. 0 in cash games. I mean, we've seen the floor with Thorne. Like, isn't he like that range of outcomes with Peyton Thorne, Justin, man? He could go 4 points and be pulled at halftime, or maybe he could go 28 points. I'm not going to take that risk. And Hawkins, I just have 0 confidence right now in the Oklahoma Sooners. I think he's got talent. He's shown me, moments where I'm impressed, but he's still isn't he a redshirt freshman? Or is he a true freshman? Like,
he's definitely young.
Yeah. So it would be GPP only.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I would lean towards him if you're making me pick one, just because I think he could, potentially could break a long run or something, give you some ceiling, but nothing that you have to play. So Samuel in the YouTube chat, thank you, says, I love listening to you guys. So informative. Probably wouldn't play college DFS if not for you guys. Appreciate those.
Thank you, Sam.
Compliments. And Don Yeezy saying solid picks as usual, checking us out on Saturday morning. So thanks for joining us. And almost 200 of you been watching. So be sure to hit that thumbs up button. We appreciate that. Help us stay on top of the YouTube algorithms there. If you like what we are giving you every Saturday morning. So I think we've covered everything. I've been through the questions in the Discord, been through the questions in the YouTube. We've gone through the FanDuel slate and the DraftKings slate, and we are pretty close to an hour. So we'll go ahead and call it a morning for the college football show. Thanks, as always, to John for joining me on a Saturday. Thanks to Devin for working hard producing behind the scenes for us here on the weekend. And we hope you all have a great weekend as well, the middle of the fall season. So enjoy the football, enjoy the weekend. Thanks to John and to Devin. I'm Justin. We'll catch you all later, everybody.